Hi, my name is Brian Morales, and I am a middle school band director, high school percussion tech for marching band and indoor drumline, as well as a freelance composer, arranger, primarily for percussion ensemble. In my presentation today, I'm going to be discussing best practices when arranging and composing music for the public school percussion ensemble. And I'll be using examples from 20th century pop music arrangements um, to support this. So, as we move through this presentation, we'll be analyzing two very different arrangements of Gershwin's fascinating rhythm. Um, Additionally, we'll also be talking about two arrangements of my own that I wrote while I researched these various practices. And those are Gershwin's I Got Rhythm and Peggy Lee's Mañana. Controversy. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, the three things that I'm focusing on as we move through this is instrumentation, voicing and orchestration, as well as difficulty level. Now, there are all kinds of other things that we can talk about as far as percussion arranging or composing in general, but for this, we are going to focus in on those three, as I feel that those are the biggest factors when arranging for percussion ensemble, especially for the public school. So what's all this about Mañana and controversy and what? You're making a percussion arrangement of it? Well, if you've listened to the lyrics of Mañana, which I will not repeat here, we can probably agree that at best, it's ignorant, and at worst, it's racist. On top of that, the music that they used to accompany Peggy Lee isn't even Mexican at all, despite the fact that the song was supposedly inspired by a trip to Baja. The music they use is actually Brazilian, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about instrumentation. But I thought that it was important to mention that appreciation versus appropriation is something that we absolutely have to consider as arrangers and composers, regardless of what ensemble you are composing for, marching band, symphony, choir, percussion ensemble. We absolutely need to make sure that we are respecting cultures when borrowing music. While I feel that Mañana's lyrics have absolutely no place on a performance stage, I think that dismantling it and reconstructing it with a different perspective can have some educational value, which is why I chose this piece as one of my two arrangements. So, in my opinion, the first thing that you have to consider when you're writing or arranging a piece of music is what kind of canvas you have to paint on and what kind of paint you can use, right? What colors are available to you. Um, so, one of the first questions I always ask myself is who am I writing for? What vibe am I going for? The color, timbre, and tone. And can we even hear all of the cool things that I'm writing? So these are all things to take into consideration when we are deciding on instrumentation. So something else to consider when deciding on instrumentation, and this kind of ties into who am I writing for, is what instruments might the ensemble have available? What does the average percussion ensemble look like in middle school and high school in public schools? The answer is that it's going to vary greatly. Some of that's going to depend on region. Is the school a Title One? Do they have funding? There are a lot of different factors, and it's not going to be one size fits all. But something to keep in mind is accessibility. Can we write and provide alternate options? And again, back to my first question, what does the average middle school and high school instrumentation look like? I had no idea, and I couldn't find this information anywhere online. I'm part of quite a few band director, middle school band director, high school band director Facebook groups, and I created an informal survey just using Google Forms, and I was able to actually get over 200, almost 250 directors to participate to kind of help paint a picture of what instrumentation actually looks like in public schools. And I'm not surprised. As a percussion instructor that's lived in 4 different states and worked with various types of schools, I'm actually not surprised at all with the results that I got. So 28.4% of the schools surveyed have one marimba, just one. 16, about almost 17% of schools surveyed had two marimbas, right? So right there, that's our majority. The majority of public schools have one or two marimbas. So unless you're in Texas, you're probably not seeing 4 and 5 marimbas, which to me is really strange, because if you look at tapspace.com, one of the most popular places to buy percussion ensemble lit, you're constantly seeing scores for 3, 4, 5 marimbas. Those that may be a little bit unrealistic, or at least not accessible to the majority of programs. As far as vibraphone, 33% of schools have one, just one, which again strikes me as strange, because hoponrolloff.com, even C. Allen Publications, a lot of these big names in percussion, you're seeing 2 vibraphone parts. Now, 24% of schools do have 2 vibraphones, and there's a very small percentage, 10.8%, that has 3. But again, most schools just have 1, and most middle schools don't have any. So you can see on my chart here, 16.3% don't have any vibraphones. Those are mostly middle schools. In fact, most middle schools only have xylophone and orchestra bells, as far as mallet percussion goes. And then some have a marimba, 1. I saw maybe 6 or 7 schools that were middle school level and had more than 2 marimba, or 2 or more marimbas. So this is something to take into account when you are writing. Who are you writing for, and is your piece gonna be accessible? So, like I mentioned earlier, I've been studying 2 arrangements of Gershwin and Gershwin's Fascinating Rhythm, and these arrangements could not be more different, and I'll play you a sample of both in just a moment here. So the first one is by Sandy Feldstein, and it utilizes xylophone, glockenspiel, played by 1 player, 1 marimba, 3 woodblocks, triangle, 3 tuned concert toms, a concert bass drum, and timpani. So this is going to be very accessible to most public high schools, and even many public middle schools, as these instruments are pretty readily available in most public schools. So this is great. It feels like a very traditional percussion ensemble piece, as you'll hear in a moment. The second arrangement is by Jeff Moore, and he is a prolific percussion arranger. If you are a performer or teach percussion, you have probably, I can't imagine you haven't played or taught at least one of his arrangements or compositions at some point. So with his arrangement here, he utilizes a more contemporary instrumentation and kind of gives us this really cool modern jazz fusion feel. He includes rhythm section, orchestra bells, 2 marimbas, 2 vibes, xylophone, and crotales. So a middle school might have trouble with this instrumentation, though if we look more closely at the difficulty level of this piece, one can see that it is meant for a more experienced high school group or collegiate students. it's definitely not going to be approachable for your average middle school. So the instrumentation in that regard is probably okay. Um, Keeping in mind the results of my survey and also the instrumentation of these two pieces, with my arrangement of I Got Rhythm, I went ahead and utilized two marimba parts, but they can be played on the same instrument. So for schools that only have one marimba, we can have a top player and a bottom player. Um, I did utilize two vibraphone parts. However, I wrote in my composer's notes that vibraphone 2, which is primarily block chords, chord comping, could be played on a piano, electric keyboard, or even guitar in a pinch. It was actually based off of the guitar part in Peggy Lee's recording. And then I included xylophone, orchestra bells, and rhythm section, which includes bass guitar, drum set, and hand percussion. If I move this arrangement forward in the future, at our professor's suggestion, actually, I may include some optional steel pan parts. It kind of ended up with this like neat island swing vibe, and I think steel pan would be a great addition in the future, and also open it up to more types of ensembles. With my arrangement of Mañana, my first step here, before even deciding exactly what I was going to write for, was to do some research. Lee and Barbour's version of this song was a mix of Brazilian musical styles, samba and rumba. Now, this was probably a result of their choice to use Carmen Miranda's Brazilian band, and for the recording. And so ironically, the music in Mañana, which talks negatively of Mexicans and was supposedly inspired by a trip to Baja, isn't Mexican at all. It's Brazilian. So Mexico is a big place and it has many different musical traditions. So Lee claims that the song was inspired by a trip to Ensenada, which is in Baja California. Like most of or much of northern Mexico, at the time of Lee's visit in the 40s, Norteño was popular in the region. However, Baja, if you look at it on a map, is a bit of an outlier, and it's not just geographically, culturally as well. So the Norteño music in Baja is unique in that it incorporates influences of imported music that are popular in that region, which would be like rock and cumbia. Now, at the time of Lee's visit, rock was in its very early stages, and it had definitely not made its way to Baja. However, cumbia had already started to take hold in the area. So, cumbia is heavily ingrained in Mexican musical and dance culture, though it didn't actually originate in Mexico. It actually came from Colombia, blending dance and rhythms of enslaved Africans and instruments of Colombian natives. However, in the 1940s, Colombian musician Luis Carlos Mayer Castanet immigrated to Mexico, and he brought cumbia with him. He worked with orchestra director Rafael de Paz, and this started a whole new thing. And in Mexico, cumbia blended with local music styles like norteño and mariachi to form this unique flavor of cumbia known as Mexican cumbia. And when writing my arrangement of Mañana, this is what I had to keep in mind, because I want to stay true to the area of Mexico that this was the song was originally supposedly inspired by. So in my arrangement, I used the same mallet instrumentation that I used in I Got Rhythm, plus a slightly different rhythm section, drum set, bass guitar, and also an acoustic guitar. But In addition to that, I also included traditional cumbia percussion section featuring tambora, amador, tambor alegre, and maracas. So, oh, and redoba, which is really cool. It's a wood block that we tie to a belt, and you actually play it while dancing and moving, which is a really neat aspect of performance. Now, I understand that most schools are not going to have access to these instruments, and so they can. I write in my composer's notes that they can be substituted with congas, bongos, or other hand percussion. But I think it's important to include those names because that's what was part of the original music tradition. So even if a band director can't provide those instruments, we can at least talk to our students about what those instruments were and where they came from, right? So even though we might not have access to them, we can still discuss them, even though we may use substitutes in our performance. This circles back to appreciation versus appropriation, right? So understanding the context and tradition is an important part of being appreciative, right? So again, something we need to keep in mind as we are arranging and composing music from cultures that are not necessarily our own. So what is the takeaway here? Things to take into consideration when deciding on an instrument for your arrangement. Who are you writing for? And is the instrumentation accessible for your intended performers? What instruments will best represent the style you're going for? And if writing music from another culture, are you honoring it through your instrument choices, right? Are you considering the context in which they were originally used within the culture? So I chose my instruments, and now what? How do we decide who plays what and when? If we're arranging, do we retain the original feel and style of the piece, or are we reimagining it into something else? Those are things we're going to be thinking about when we're deciding how to voice and orchestrate. Does my chord placement make sense with the natural voice of the instrument, right? So like if you're looking at a piano chord, typically we would want to place the low end of the piano chord on an instrument that is going to speak with that voice, like the low marimba or the bottom part of a vibraphone. Color, timbre, tone, right? So we're going to typically use crotales as color instruments. We're not going to write a melody on crotale throughout the whole length of a piece. Orchestra bell is kind of similar. So when we're writing for younger groups, we may put the melody on that instrument just due to instrument availability. And then can all the cool stuff that I wrote be heard in context, right? Like if you're writing for drumline, does your front ensemble have amplification? Can you assume that the ensemble has amplification nowadays? That's a choice you'll have to make. In the interest of time, I think we're already getting close to the 20-minute mark here. I'm not going to go dig as deeply. I'll include a link to my paper, so you're more than welcome to get more details there. So the last point that I'd like to touch on is difficulty level. So in preparation for writing my paper, I read an article in Percussive Notes by Gene Fambro that talked to 5 prolific drum corps international and indoor marching percussion arrangers. And one thing they all agreed on was that you got to challenge your ensemble, but keep in mind their limitations. You need to have realistic expectations. Now, depending on what you're writing for, you may not know your ensemble, right? If you're a percussion instructor who is arranging for your marching band group, or you're commissioned to write a piece for a specific group, you may know their ability levels. However, if not, then when you're writing your piece, you want to think about who is my audience, right? Who are my performers? Am I writing for a middle school? Am I writing for high school, college, advanced high school, right? You have to think about that and keep your expectations realistic. Is your piece approachable? Is it doable, right? So if you take a look at Grusin and Moore's arrangement of Fascinating Rhythm, it's pretty clear, even with just a quick glance at the score, that the drum set part is not going to be approachable by a young player. Though Moore does mention in his notes that the drum set part can be simplified as necessary. That said, an abundance of four mallet parts, fast tempo, and tons of time signature changes suggests that this piece is intended for more advanced players. That, and it says right at the top, very difficult in its classification level. Um, for my arrangement of I Got Rhythm, it's definitely intended for a group that has two highly proficient vibraphone players. Peggy Lee's version of this song includes a mallet soloist who is very technically proficient, and there's just a lot of fast moving notes throughout the entire piece, which is what inspired me to choose it for my arrangement. The Vibe 2 part has a lot of tough, challenging four mallet chord changes, and so I definitely wrote with a more advanced group in mind. Though I tried to stagger the difficulty level. So, a typical high school is not going to have all advanced players, right? So, with that piece, I hope that it is approachable at the high school level for, two or more advanced players, and then parts in between that are written at varying difficulty levels to accommodate. When writing Mañana, I actually had a very specific group of performers in mind, and that's my own middle school percussion ensemble. I thought that it would be a great way to solidify young players' understanding of the dotted quarter note, tied notes, mallet percussion rolls, as well as challenge some of my more experienced players with syncopated syncopated 16th note patterns on the hand drums and auxiliary percussion, as well as some three mallet chord changes on vibraphone. I think the difficulty level in that piece would be very approachable for young high school groups, as well as some more advanced middle school groups that have the appropriate instrumentation. So the takeaway: no arrangement is going to be one size fits all, and some of the responsibility is really going to fall on the directors and instructors of those ensembles to choose music that is appropriate for their students. However, as arrangers and composers, we can approach writing with an ensemble in mind and have realistic expectations. We can offer pieces that have varying difficulty levels. For example, a challenging vibraphone part with other mallet parts that are easier. We can offer accommodations for groups in our notes. That would be a good fit if it wasn't for that one part. We want to challenge students we want to challenge students to improve their proficiency while also making parts approachable to build confidence. How we approach every piece we arrange and write is going to be different. And as we go through the process of writing for public school ensembles, we should keep in mind who we are writing for and take into account instrumentation, voicing, orchestration, and difficulty level. We want to make our pieces educational, approachable, and of course enjoyable to play and to listen to. And additionally, when writing and arranging music from other cultures, we want to make sure that we are doing right by those cultures and educating students on the background and where that music came from.